Hi, everybody. Welcome to week 29 of the Bible Together reading program here at First Christian Church in Jefferson City, Missouri. One of the things that I am loving about reading the Bible this way, with different parts of the story sitting alongside each other, is that sometimes a connection shows up that I might have missed if I were reading each book on its own. This week, we are continuing to read about the kings of Israel and Judah and the prophets Elijah and Elisha. And alongside those stories, we also pick up Matthew, where the story of Jesus begins with a genealogy. Now, at first, that genealogy might just feel like another boring list of names. But I want us to stop and notice for a second that Matthew is actually doing something really important. He is establishing Jesus as the heir of the story of Israel that we are reading about in the Old Testament, the descendant of David, the long-awaited king who was foretold to come out of Israel's royal line. The thing that always strikes me, though, when I read Matthew's genealogy is that it is not nearly as neat and tidy as we might expect the genealogy of the King of Kings would be. Not only are there a bunch of not so faithful kings in that list, but Matthew also deliberately names several women: Tamar, Rahab, Ruth, Bathsheba, and even Mary. These are not necessarily the women we would expect to see highlighted in a royal genealogy. They include widows, foreigners, women with complicated stories, women whose circumstances were anything but respectable. And yet Matthew intentionally names them as part of the Messiah's background story. That makes me think about something we just read in 1 Kings. Elijah is sent to a widow in Zarephath. She's not an Israelite. She is a foreign woman living through the middle of a famine with barely enough food left to keep herself and her son alive. And yet that's where God sends Elijah. And she welcomes him and agrees to share what little she has left. Through her, an outsider in every possible way, God provides for Elijah. Then in that same story, we meet the infamous Queen Jezebel. She is also a foreign woman, but she is one with power and influence. And she uses those gifts to manipulate and destroy. So perhaps the point of all those outsider women who show up in Jesus' genealogy isn't just that God has a special fondness for outsiders. The Bible is more complicated than that. Maybe the point is something more like the fact that God does not measure people by the categories we tend to use. Jezebel is an outsider with power who uses it to grasp and destroy. The widow is an outsider with almost nothing who uses the little she does have to welcome and sustain. The women in Jesus' genealogy come from complicated stories and unexpected backgrounds, and still Matthew says they belong in this story. Matthew reminds us that even the King of Kings comes from a family tree with lots of gnarled and crooked branches. Maybe that's worth paying attention to as we keep reading. Scripture is constantly showing us that God doesn't always work in the same or in the ways that we expect, or through the people we expect. I wonder, as I think about it this week, who God might be working through that we have tended to overlook. I wonder who God might be inviting us to see differently. I wonder if maybe it's you. Thanks for joining me this week, friends. I look forward to seeing you again next week for week 30.